So today I'm going to be talking about my CRI genetics results. So I guess I should talk about my backstory. I live in the New World, i.e., either the US or Canada, and my descendants or my ancestry is from Jamaica. I've done a lot of genealogy over the last I guess almost 4 years now since I started in 2021. I've taken the 23 and Me test, the ancestry test, and I believe I also took GEDmatch as well. And I think I took another one as well, but I don't really remember what it is right now, but I've taken a few of these and they always did recent ancestry, so like the last 5 or 6 generations. So I know my results from there, though obviously there were some changes that happened. And then I heard of CRI genetics, which not only looks at your recent ancestry, but it also looks at your ancient ancestry as well. So I thought that would be something that I that would be very nice to look at. And CRI Genetics is a privately owned company, so your information isn't being shipped off anywhere, which is why I decided to use this one as well. And there's different data that they're going to look at. So with my family, I don't live in Jamaica, but my family has lived in Jamaica for generations. One of my parents moved, was born in Jamaica, and then 4 of my grandparents were born in Jamaica. Then generations and generations and generations before that were just in Jamaica. On one line of my family tree, my family has been in Jamaica for like 6 to 7 generations, and this was before my grandparents. So they've been there for a few hundred years. So that is my history. But obviously, when you do an ancestry test, it's not going to show Jamaican on it, since Jamaica is, when it comes to society, still a relatively new land, and they do this with all of the New World countries. So, like, there's not going to be Canadian results for Canada, the United States, any country in the Caribbean, Central America, or South America. It's going to talk about the ancestry and the admixture from other areas, which tends to come from either Europe, Africa, Asia, or if they do refer to the Americas, they're going to refer to Amerindian indigenous ancestry. So we're going to scroll down here. We're just going to get to the ancestry result. So we're going to look into the recent ancestry and the advanced ancestry, the advanced timeline, the maternal haplogroup, supposed famous people that I'm related to. I don't know how accurate that's going to be, and the trait tracer. Let's look at the recent analysis. So this is pretty interesting. So, recent ancestry analysis. So based on the latest genetic research available, this recent ancestry report represents your last 5 generations. So obviously this is my parents, ancestry going from my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and great-great-great-grandparents. So those are the last 5 generations. This analysis is based on the genetic makeup currently found most abundant in each of the specific geographic regions. This report should closely match with what your parents and grandparents may have told you about your heritage. Some of this is very shocking based on what I know about my ancestry. Some of these really don't come up. It's interesting that Jamaica doesn't come up since technically I'm literally Jamaican in 23andMe and Ancestry. Jamaica shows up when it comes to Ancestry in the Americas. So this is interesting. Is this Barbados? 11% from African Caribbean. So that's interesting. I don't know what that means, but we'll scroll lower. Okay, a lot of Africa, which isn't surprising if anyone knows anything about the transatlantic slave trade to anywhere in the Americas, where they brought people who are from Africa into the Americas, and the black people in the Americas descend from Africans. And because of location, obviously they descended from Western Africa. So this looks like Gamibia, which showed up in my other report. I'm trying to remember what report it was. I probably show it either here or in another video, but it showed up in one of my reports. But it talked about like the closest ancestry results. I'll talk about that later. Sierra Leone, that's not shocking, that shows up in my results, and Nigeria isn't either. Kenya is very surprising because they didn't get any East African DNA trace in any of my ancestry results, so we'll see what that means. Obviously, with Europe, Europeans brought sub-Saharan Africans to the America, and due to the slave trade, some of them liked. I'm obviously not using the actual word, but they ate grapes with or put grapes on black people. So any black person in the Americas has a little bit of admixture. The countries that shown up on my results is essentially Britain and Ireland, and if you know the history of Jamaica, that makes sense because Jamaica was owned by the British. Um, Italy and Poland, those have never shown up on my results. That's odd. And then, okay, that's it. What's interesting is that on my other results, on my other tests, India shows up, and that's not here. So that's very interesting. Let's scroll down. Okay, this is very interesting. Okay, so on my Ancestry and 23andMe results, I usually get around 91%, so that's not shocking at all. But when I look at my other tests, which is Ancestry and 23andMe, I don't get 9% Europe. I usually get 3 to 4% European, and the rest is South Asian, i.e. Indian. So I find it interesting that my European is 9%, and there's no South Asian here. So let's break down the African. So it shows here that out of the 91% Africa, 45% of that came from the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria, which I guess really isn't shocking because I believe they take either. Obviously, when the slave trade happened, Nigeria wasn't an actual country yet. There's just a bunch of tribes. And I guess, based off of this result, the tribe that they took me from was Yoruba. Then there's Isan, which is another area in Nigeria. I wonder what they mean by African Caribbean. That's such a very generalized term that I definitely want to get into a bit more to see what the heck they are talking about. And with the countries that they used on that map, that doesn't really fit my immediate ancestry. So the Mende in Sierra Leone. I don't know much about the Mende in Sierra Leone either. I'm gonna look into that. The Gamibian really isn't shocking at all, because I did one of those tests where it showed your ancient ancestry and your current ancestry. It's the one that has the PCA plot. I'll probably put it up in the link somewhere to state what it is. It showed that my closest reference population is Gamibia, I believe, so that really isn't surprising to me. And the Luya in Kenya. I am shocked that Kenya came up because I've never had Kenya in any of my ancestry results, so that's interesting. And I don't recall Kenyans really traveling or being a part of the transatlantic slave trade that carried itself over to the Caribbean. So that's very shocking. So we're going to do the actual bracket. So 45% Yoruba in Nigeria. Okay, so that's Yoruba here. Okay, so this is in what is now Western Nigeria. So I'm gonna read this down and then we're gonna break it down. So you are 45% Yoruba. Your ancestors in this region were famous for arts, festivals, and music. Yoruba people were known for being very expressive people with colorful festivals and celebrations. They were especially famous for an advanced drumming tradition that became a prominent musical style in West Africa and beyond. That I am very aware of, and even in Jamaica, they use a lot of drums, and they clearly got that from the Yoruba people who are brought over to what is now known as Jamaica. So, Possible related countries of origin include Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Portugal. Portugal is very interesting. I definitely want to look up the relations between Yoruba and Portugal. I don't know if maybe no, because from what I know, I believe Latin America took a lot of people from Central Africa instead of Western Africa, especially the Portuguese. So I definitely am gonna have to do more research on that. So the Yoruba are an African ethnic group that originated in what is now Nigeria. There are about 44 million Yorubas, making them one of the largest ethnic groups on the continent. They are renowned for their sculptures and cuisine. Traditional beliefs follow a pantheon of different gods sent by a creator of God, Olorun. For Yoruba Christians and Muslims, the name Olorun is used to signify Yahweh or Allah. The Yoruba people maintain a long oral tradition of their history. The first documents written about them date back to the 17th century CE from the Oyo Empire. The first archaeological evidence for the Yoruba stems from the 4th century BCE at Ife. I'm positive I didn't say that correctly, but we're going to move on. The Yoruba claim that the gods descend from the heavens at Ife. Excuse my mispronunciation. According to legend, the gods started the civilization there. Archaeologists have uncovered advanced sculptures in Eve during the 12th century CE. This is right around the time that the Oyo Empire began, so I'm definitely going to do more research on the Oyo Empire. The Oyo Empire held substantial power during the 17th and 18th centuries and was able to assert influence over its neighbors. It maintained its power by trading with Portuguese merchants. They exchanged goods and slaves for Portuguese guns. Oh, okay, so I guess that's how the connection started. And that's why Portugal was listed above. The Oyo Empire served as the middleman for the transatlantic slave trade. They sold criminals, captives, and subjugated people to Europeans. Okay, that's where it came from, because there's a lot of diasporic talking points online about how certain Africans sold other Africans out to the white slave owners, essentially, which is why some of them were brought to what is now known as the Americas, and which is why some African Americans and some Caribbean people hold some resentment towards some West African people. So that makes sense. Once the Oyo Empire grew complacent and fell into civil war in 1793. The Civil War led to its demise in 1835. What remained of the Oyo Empire was obliterated by the Fulani Empire in 1836. The British came along later to colonize the region in the early 1900s and formed what is now Nigeria. Okay, that makes sense. So, based on this, I'm assuming, based on when my ancestors were taken from Western Africa, it wasn't Nigeria at all, since it clearly says early 1900s, and I've had ancestors in Jamaica from well before 1900. The Yoruba people have seen two major diasporas. The first diaspora was during the transatlantic slave trade. Many Yoruba captives and criminals were sold to Europeans for transports to the New World during the 17th and 18th centuries, so that's the 1600s and the 1700s. The second diaspora came after the political upheaval in the 1960s and 1980s Nigeria. This diaspora largely went to the United Kingdom and the United States. In the US, this group settled in Maryland, New York, and New Jersey. And I know just from my history, my descendants would be, or I descend from the first diaspora regarding the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for the Yoruba, and that makes up essentially half of my DNA. So there is the Isan in Nigeria. I believe that's them here, though I'm not too sure. And I only have 15% of that. So the possible related countries of origin include Nigeria, Benin, Togo, England, and Portugal. So pretty much the same, a lot of the same countries, even from the European stuff. The Isan people are an ethnic group located in southern Nigeria. The language Isan is taught to children and is brought on radio and television. Many scholars and archaeologists believe that the Isan came from people to the north. This is because the Isan share cultural and linguistic similarities with their northern neighbors, the Idu. I have no idea who they are. The traditional symbol of the Isan people is a crow's foot tribal scar below their eyes. The Isan people appeared in Africa in the 1500s before colonization by Europeans. It is likely that they descend from the Nook people, an Iron Age culture that lived 1500 BCE to 300 CE. The Nook grew yams, palms, and vegetables, but also engaged in hunting and gathering. The Nook's children built advanced walls, moats, and buildings after 300 CE. They formed several nations, including the Benin Kingdom. Oh, so that's the tie to Benin and Togo. Oh, it would eventually become Benin and Togo. When Oba Iwi, king of Benin, passed very restrictive laws, the Isan people broke away. In doing so, they formed Isanan. Ooh, I should really do more research on what Isanan is. In Bini, the language of the Benin, Isan means they who have fled. Interesting. The Isan and the Benin Empire warred many times, but the Benin Empire won most of these conflicts. During the 1800s, the Isan people faced threats from many sides. First came the Muslim New people, who sought slaves and converts. Then, in the late 1890s, the British annihilated the Benin Kingdom. A few years later, the Brits came back for Isanan. The Isan fought a guerrilla war with the British, but lost in 1906. All 34 Isan kingdoms became a part of Britain's Ishan division. Interesting, I have to do more research on that. They gained sovereignty from British rule in 1960, where Nigeria gained its independence. Today, Isan society is mostly agrarian. It suffers from poverty, lack of infrastructure, and infighting. A large percentage of the Isan are Christians, but they have also held onto many traditional beliefs. So, this third category is African Caribbean, and I descend from Afro Caribbean people based on my immediate family history, like my parents. And even on the other ancestry, it shows that I descend from Afro Caribbeans. So let's see where it points me to. Oh, so this is very general. Okay, that's interesting because it had me around Barbados. It's like I don't have any family that's related to me, at least in Barbados. I do have some people who are married to my related family members that are Bayesian, and I have other family members that are Bayesian, but they're like cousins and an aunt and uncle who married into the family. But not anyone in my immediate family, like not my parents, not my siblings, not my grandparents, stuff like that. So African Caribbean, and I have 11.1% of this, so that's interesting. I'm wondering how they separated this. So possible related countries of origin include Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, which, yeah, Spain. Interesting that they included Spain in this and not like Britain or any other European country. Angola, Nigeria, Namibia, and Senegal. So I wonder how they're separating this since they also include African people in this as well. Sorry, African countries in this as well as Spain. But Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Jamaica are definitely the main four countries that listed here. It's interesting how they included these but not other Caribbean countries. But yeah, uh, Jamaican is definitely accurate since literally I'm Jamaican. Before Europeans, the Caribbean was populated by the Taino. When European colonists arrived, they enslaved many Taino to grow sugarcane. Most Taino died from disease and horrendous working conditions. This marked the beginning of the African slave trade, as slaves made a lot of money. For Europeans, not for themselves. Europeans turned to the nations of West Africa to find replacements for the dead Taino. So I can discuss all that in the prior videos. Today, the African Caribbeans make up their population, or sorry, they make up the population majority of the Caribbean islands, which is definitely true. It might be easy to assume that African Caribbean ancestry is West African ancestry. Yes, because that always shows up on our results, and just from history, we know that we descend from West Africans. So I'm wondering how they distinguish them. However, this isn't an accurate assessment of the original or the origin of African Caribbean people. Slavery was abolished in the Caribbean roughly 30 years before it was in the United States. In fact, Haiti was the second nation in the Western Hemisphere to break free from colonial rule. A slave revolt turned into revolution 23 years after the American Revolutionary War. When Haiti gained independence from France, it sparked a movement throughout the Caribbean. By 1807, the British banned the sale of slaves, though current slaves remained as they were. The people who remained found freedom within 30 years, but much of the Caribbean remained under European rule in the 20th century. African Caribbean people are genetically unique. This is partly because people from different African nations were forced to intermarry. Oh, okay, so I guess that's how they kind of distinguished it, and they formed their own cluster. Individual genetics will vary, but the quote unquote average African Caribbean has an even split between Ghana, Benin, Nigeria, and the Congo, roughly 20 to 25% each. And just based on some of these results, it kind of makes sense. Several other nations make up smaller percentages. This unique blend of cultures led to music and cuisine unlike that in any other part of the world. Creole groups share these characteristics but are also unique in their own way. So I think I somewhat get how it's different than the other African groups because it's a mix of some of these, and those mixes kind of just continue intermarrying as they were stuck on the islands. I thought they were going to distinguish it by indigenous DNA, but that didn't really make much sense to me. Okay, so the fourth category is Mende in Sierra Leone. I'm pretty sure I've had Sierra Leone pop up on my results, so that's really not surprising. So I'm wondering if this means that out of the prior 5 generations, let's just say my parents, grandparents, the 3 times great grandparents, if a lot of them actually were African, and only like 1 or 2 of them were Jamaican at the time. So I'm wondering if that's where that came from. Anyways, Mende and Sierra Leone. Possible related countries of origin include Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia, and Britain. Obviously, makes sense with the Britain because the British took over all of the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, where I descend from. The Mende people, or Mende, are a major ethnic group in Sierra Leone. They are a subset of the Mande peoples and live in the southern and eastern portions of Sierra Leone. The Mende language is also widely spoken in Liberia. The Mende believe that all human knowledge and power passes through secret societies. They founded 2 distinct secret societies under this belief. Poro is the secret society for men and initiates boys into manhood. I don't even want to know how, but I might have to research that. Sunday is the secret society for women and initiates girls into womanhood. And oh gosh, I just saw a bit of the next sentence. The Sunday against and female genital mutilation face harsh criticism for this practice, as they deservedly do. Men and women are forbidden from sharing what they learn in their secret societies to people outside the group. This sounds horrendous and seems arguably unethical, but ugh, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. They cannot share this information with people of opposite sex in their tribe or of the opposite sex in their tribe either. In Mende tradition, women hold a remarkable amount of power. They frequently hold positions as war leaders and chiefs. They are one of the few pre-industrial societies that recognizes women as equal to men. Pregnancy is not seen as a sign of weakness, like it might be in other cultures. Instead, it is seen as a sign of strength to give birth, much like it was in ancient Sparta. Traits such as long, thick hair are also seen as signs of strength. The Mande people, from whom the Mende descend, originated in Central Saharan Africa around 3000 BCE. They developed agriculture without outside influence. The Mande formed some of the largest and most powerful societies in Africa, including the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, and the Ghana Empire. They started the practice of secret societies around 1000 BCE, and the Mande continued the practice. So the next is Luhaya in Kenya, and I'm shocked I have this Kenyan ancestry because it never shows up on anything else. Obviously, I guess it's by the water of Kenya. Okay, let's see. Okay, so possible related countries of origin include Kenya, Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt, Somalia, Uganda, Tanzania. Obviously, those are all Eastern or Northeastern African countries, so it makes sense. England is interesting, and I do know I have English ancestry from the slave trade. The Luya are a subset of the Bantu people located in western Kenya. They constitute 16% of Kenya's total population of or 5.3 million people. The Luya make up 18 different tribes and they share many similarities with the Kisii people to the southwest. Anthropologists and Luya legends disagree on the origin of the Luya. Anthropologists believe that the Luya originated from the final Bantu expansion in 1000 BCE. This final expansion came from Central and Western Africa. Mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, from the Luya and Bantu suggests a West African origin. However, Luya legend states that the Luya actually came from a place they call Misiri. Misiri corresponds to the kingdom of Egypt. Ancient Hebrew and Aramaic also refer to Egypt as Mizraim. Egyptians call it Masr. The name comports with other languages, which would suggest Eastern African descent. Before colonization by Europeans, the Luhya defined their boundaries by shared culture. Thus, their borders were much more fluid when compared to traditional European borders. The most powerful kingdom in Kenya at the time was founded by the Wanga, a Luhya tribe. When European nations began their scramble to colonize Africa, most of Eastern Africa went to the British. So that's interesting. The British subdivided Eastern Africa into what is now Kenya and Uganda. Of course they did, but I do know that a lot of these African countries and the borders were declared by Europeans, so that's not shocking. Naturally, some of the Luya people were not thrilled about this turn of events. There were violent upswings against the colonial rulers, but the British maintained power until Kenya gained independence in 1963. Since then, Kenya has slowly transitioned into a democratic state. So now we're getting into the final African country I have in my ancestry results. And that is Gamibia, so it's that little strip there. Possible related countries of origin include Senegal, Guinea, Bissau, Mali, England, and Portugal. Interesting that England and Portugal also pop up here. Okay, I'm going to try to read this quickly. The Republic of the Gambia is the smallest country in Africa and is also located next to the Gambia River. Very resourceful. And is surrounded by almost all sides by Senegal, and its western border lies along the Atlantic Ocean. The Gambia's economy is primarily made up of farming, fishing, and tourism. Modern Gambia faces political instability because of repeated insurrections and coup attempts. Oh gosh. Arab traders wrote the first records about the region in the 9th and 10th centuries. These traders traveled the trans-Saharan trade route. They brought gold, livestock, and slaves along with their camels. In the 13th century, the Mali Empire formed and included what is now Gambia. The Mali Empire was renowned for its vast wealth. It became wealthy by controlling the flow of salt and gold between several regions. This wealth allowed the Mali Empire to establish Timbuktu as a major center of learning in Central Africa. Later, rulers would build extravagant mosques and templates there. The wealth of the Mali Empire was so famous that the word of Timbuktu would spread to Europe. Interesting. But the Mali Empire, like all empires, eventually fell. It suffered from infighting and was chipped away by outside forces. The Songhai Empire conquered what remained of Mali in the 15th century. In the process, they took the Gambia River. The Songhai later collapsed when they came under repeated attacks by the Portuguese in the 16th century. The Portuguese seized control of the Gambia River and used it as a trading hub. They bought slaves bound for the Caribbean and South America and sold guns in return. The name Gamibia comes from the Portuguese word for trade, cambio. Oh, I guess that makes sense. In the 1600s, the Portuguese ceded control over the Gamibia. Over the next few centuries, it traded hands between the English and the French. It ultimately became a part of the UK Commonwealth. Okay, so I see that connection and how it could connect to Jamaica. In the 1960s, the Gambia gained its independence from the UK. It established its own constitutional monarchy. Then, in the 1970s, it became a republic. Since then, it has seen many different insurrections and coup attempts. I just realized because this section mentions Mali a lot, and I get Mali on pretty much every single ancestry test I do, so this Gambia can really be, I don't want to say a mystery, but it can also be read for Mali, and if you really look at it, it kind of makes sense just based on the location. Okay, now we're going to move on to Europe. And it's 9%. I usually get 9% non-African on all, but like I mentioned earlier, and like I'll show in the future, I never get 9% European. My European's usually like 3 to 4% at the most. And Italian never shows up. So let's see how this showed up. Maybe it's a case of like one great grandparent. I don't know how that would be. Okay, now let's read this. Italian, 6.5%, supposedly. Europe has been inhabited by modern humans for the last 40,000 years. Italy, in particular, provided a temperate refuge for humans during the ice ages, as most of the recent Europe, or the rest of Europe, was covered in ice. Makes sense, it's closest to the equator, so it's the hottest out of the European countries. The Alpine Mountains and Mediterranean Sea provided barriers that limited migration to and from Italy and the rest of the world, which helped forge a unique genetic identity for people with Italian ancestry. There is genetic evidence of some migrations, as northern Italians tended to be more genetically similar to French and German populations, which I knew about, and while southern Italians tended to be more genetically similar to Balkan and Greek populations. Italians from central Italy tend to blur the genetic borders between the north and the south, which all just makes sense due to location, but may also descend from Etruscans, who are believed to have migrated from Turkey and the Middle East, which I knew about when it comes to the Anatolian DNA in southern Europe. Migrations from Greece and Turkey had the largest impact on the culture and future genetic heritage of Italy, an impact that then affected the rest of the Western civilization. According to legend, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, who were believed to be descended from Aeneas, a member of the Trojan royal family who fled Troy when the Greeks sacked the city. Whether there is any fact to this myth or not, it is evidence of the Greek/Etruscan influence on Roman culture, as Troy believed to have been in Turkey. Roman governance, religion, and architecture were all heavily influenced by their Greek predecessors. At its peak, the Roman Empire spread throughout almost all of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and laid the foundation of Western civilization. I find this to be odd because I never got Italian in any of my tests, and for my ancestry, Italy never showed up. And when it comes to Jamaicans, we are admixed with British and Irish, not Italian. So I'm wondering where that came from. Polish, which is at 2.5, is another shocker because I don't recall Polish people really being in Jamaica like that either. I'm not descended from Polish people, just from my paper trail and talking to family. And in my other ancestry tests, Poland never comes up. So let's read this one. Early records describe Polish life in prehistoric times when Western Slavic tribes, the ancestors of today's Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, arrived to Poland to settle. Oh gosh, this is long. In 966, Poland became formally recognized as a country by the first recorded ruler, Duke Mieszko I, after he married neighboring Bohemia, today's Czech Republic, interesting, Princess Dubravka. Okay, and was baptized into the Latin Rite, transforming Poland into a Christian country and solidifying itself in the Western culture. Poland officially became a state in 1025. Honestly, I'm really not feeling like reading all of this. Okay. So, a powerful alliance. So, there was a golden age at some point where it became one of the largest and most powerful kingdoms in Europe, which had 11 million people. The country's political system evolved into an early example of democratic monarchy. By the mid 17th century, cracks formed, and obviously things fell apart between 1918 and 1975. There was no independent state of Poland, which complicated immigration, and those who left Poland were often declared as German, Austrian, or Russian. There was World War II, where sadly many Polish people were the victims of. Post World War II, despite being on the winning side, Poland fell into the hands of the Soviet Union to control and adopting communism, making it a challenging time in Poland. By the late 1980s, Poland joined NATO in 1999 and the European Union in 2004. And yeah, that's all I'm going to read for now. So I'm definitely probably going to talk to a representative because some of these results are very confusing to me. But we're going to go through the results again. So 45% Yoruba, Nigerian, 15.4% Isan, Nigerian, 11%, African Caribbean, 7.9% Mindi Sierra Leonean, 6% Luya Kenyan, 5.5% Gamibian, and all that added together, that's 91%. I usually get like 91 or 92% on all my Ancestry results, so that's not surprising. And then Italian and Polish. It's odd that there's no British or Ireland. They usually get the United Kingdom or Ireland on my Ancestry results. So I didn't expect it to be this long, so I'm definitely going to do the advanced analysis, advanced timeline, and all that stuff in other videos. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye!